One of my favorite parts of the book was early on when you did the experiment where you plugged your nostrils with the silicone plugs and you ended up doing that for 10 days, putting tape over it. You couldn't breathe it all through your nose. So talk about how that came to be and what that experience was like.
So I live in San Francisco, and I'm really close to Stanford University, which has this incredible medical library and incredible researchers. And so I was going down there all the time to do research, and I looked up the chief of rhinology research, this guy named Dr. Jayak or Nyack, who's done so many studies in the field of rhinology and nasal breathing. So this guy's really one of the top experts in the whole world. And he was telling me all about the deleterious effects of mouth breathing. How when we breathe through the mouth, we're taxing our body, we're dehumidifying ourselves, we're exposing ourselves to allergens and pollution. So everyone knows this, right? There's not a lot of controversy. And how nasal breathing is so much more advantageous to our health, to our sleep, to our fitness. I mean, you name it. But at the same time, about 25 to 50% of the population habitually breathes through its mouth. And about 50 to 60, maybe even up to 70% is breathing through its mouth during sleep. And so everyone knows this. This is very clear scientific data, but no one knew how much of the damage from that mouth breathing came on and how quickly, right? Did this damage accumulate over decades? Where you'd be suffering from periodontal disease and cavities and all the other heinous problems, or would it come on after a couple months or a couple weeks? Nobody knew. And so over several long lunches and interviews, I said, well, let's do an experiment. And he's like, who are we going to find? I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to put people through this. That would be unethical. And I said, well, I'll do it, and I'll try to find someone else. He's like, I have no money for this. I said, well, okay, I guess we're going to have to pay for it ourselves. So the experiment was set up that it was 10 days of just mouth breathing. So silicone up the nose, mouth breathing, and then 10 days of nasal breathing. And we collected data the whole way through.
Do you know if before you got into this experiment, you're primarily breathing through your mouth?
I had become a lot more conscious of it since I had begun researching the book, right? Nyack wasn't the first person to tell me this. Although I was not conscious of it at all for 95% of my life. When I look at pictures of me as a kid, I was breathing through my mouth. When I think about when I was working out, when I was boxing, when I was surfing, jogging, whatever, I was breathing through my mouth. Every single night that I was sleeping, I was breathing through my mouth. I know that because I would always go to sleep with, a glass of water about this big by my bedside and wake up every couple hours and take a hit from it because my mouth was so dry. So I wouldn't call myself a chronic mouth breather, but I was doing it quite a bit.
Get into some of the specifics, what it's like when you're breathing air through the nose. Why is that such an advantageous way of breathing?
So the nose, imagine taking like a billiard ball, right? And jamming that ball inside of your head. That's the equivalent space of all the sinuses, okay, in the nose. So this stuff isn't there randomly. It it serves so many functions, about 30 different functions. When we take air in through the nose, it has to go through this maze of different structures, right? These different structures are coated with mucus and cilia, all this different stuff to help filter out pathogens, to help fight off viruses, bacteria. That air is warmed, it's pressurized, it's conditioned so that by the time it reaches the lungs, our lungs can actually absorb about 20% more oxygen breathing through the nose than equivalent breaths through the mouth. And if you think that's not going to make a difference throughout the day or throughout the night, you're crazy. So again, this is textbook stuff. It's not controversial.
So talk about your personal experience then. You put the nose plugs in. What was that like?
That was awful. We knew this wasn't going to be a picnic. At the same time, we wanted to make clear that this wasn't like some jackass stunt. We weren't doing this just to unnecessarily inflict pain upon ourselves. We wanted to see what it was like to be in that 25 to 50% of the population that is habitually mouth breathing. The difference was we were measuring what happened. So right off the bat, it felt terrible. I was like, oh, how are we going to do this for 10 days? We were still kind of laughing about it. It was me and one other person. I managed to sucker this guy, Anders Olsson from Sweden, a breathing therapist, big nasal breathing guy. I said, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, and come out here. I was joking when I told him that. And he flew out from Sweden on his own dime to be a part of this study and then flew back. So he didn't even get to spend any holiday time here in beautiful San Francisco. So we were laughing about it until we checked our blood pressure, and my blood pressure was just sky high within a couple hours until we went to sleep. And I recorded myself snoring for the first time that I'm aware of. We had taken 2 weeks of baseline, zero snoring, or a couple of minutes a night. That first night, hour and a half of snoring, and he had the same thing. A few days later, I was snoring for 4 hours, and we had sleep apnea. We felt absolutely awful. And you think about all the people right now who are mouth breathing all the time, who have the same fatigue, who have this dry mouth, who are constantly getting cavities, who don't realize that their breathing plays such a huge part in their overall health.
And were you guys worried because you were doing this in such an extreme way that you might cause some long-term complications?
We weren't because again, look at 15% of the population suffers from chronic sinusitis. Another 15 from rhinitis. 75% of us have a deviated septum. I mean, the so many of us are constantly plugged up. And if it's springtime or allergy season, walk around and all you're going to see is people. So at 10 days, I didn't think anything seriously was going to happen. But I'll tell you, around the eighth or ninth day, we started questioning that prediction because we were in seriously bad shape and really losing it on a number of levels. The poor Anders was walking around my neighborhood and got lost on the eighth day after he had done this walk numerous times because he was so sleep deprived and dazed. So and to experiment, what does it prove? Nothing. But what we were doing was just showing what scientists have proven for decades and decades and experiencing this personally.
And you talked about you guys weren't just hanging out all day sitting around. He went for a walk. I mean, that's not too intense, but you talk about in the book that you guys were pushing it on the bike. So doing this experiment while you had the nasal plugs in. So talk about what that was like.
So every day we tried to make each day of both phases of the experiment exactly the same. So same amount of steps, were we off by a few steps? Yes, we were. Exact same food, exact same amount of food, exact same workouts, everything. We got extremely anal about this to the point when, we're running out of steps. It's like, okay, I can't go anywhere now. I'm up to my 7,000 steps. So part of this was to test performance. And for decades, elite trainers and researchers have known that nasal breathing, once you are adapted to doing it, can show these huge gains in performance and recovery. So we would go to this stationary bike back when gyms were open at a gym right down the street from my house and just book it for a half an hour at the same heart rate. So we would keep our heart rates at 136 and just stay there. And then we would test mouth breathing versus nasal breathing to see what allowed us to perform better, right? As a very, very simple measure. And again, these weren't tests we invented. This is stuff that people have been doing for decades and decades. We were just personally experiencing it.
Talk more about the subjective difference that you notice between just breathing through the mouth and then including the nose as well.
Well, I try to shy away from my own personal experiences because I hate when authors insert themselves too much in their books and tell you about their feelings and all that. But I'll tell you, I couldn't hold all of this back. It was awful, man. I mean, on such a different level of awful, far worse than we thought. That's easy to say. Maybe it was just because we knew it was going to be awful, but I don't think so. We were, trying to be cheerful through this whole thing. We were very excited to be a part of this experiment. I mean, you should have seen the downstairs of my house. We had so many different machines and testing ourselves 3 times a day on all of these different machines. But I was just really fatigued. I got really antsy, and at the same time, I was extremely irritable. Like really short fuse over everything. I was questioning why we even did the experiment towards the end of it. I was just like, what am I doing here? I gotta like write a book about Lincoln or dogs or something. It was tough stuff. But luckily, the nasal breathing side of this experiment was coming up right on the back of this, which was just so wonderful. To be forced to be breathing in the proper way and to watch all of these measurements and our bodies just immediately respond to it.
So you mentioned how irritable you were during this experiment, breathing just through your nose. And I know you're a married man. So how did your wife handle being around you?
She's used to me doing all this weird stuff, so it's just another Tuesday for her. But we're lucky enough to have a downstairs that has a bed and a kitchen. We have like this little in-law downstairs. So I just moved down. I said, "Is that okay?" She's like, "Please go." And I'd still see her, of course. I'd come upstairs, we'd hang out, but that was my zone. So I was unable to inflict my misery upon her. And the sad thing was that all of her friends told her, "Oh my God, Katie, I feel so sorry for you. You have to deal with all this. Oh, that must suck. Him doing this experiment." I was like, "What about me? I'm the one with silicone up my nose." So we still laugh about that.
Self inflicted, though, right?
Self-inflicted, and the data behind it I thought was so fascinating. um and I love doing this stuff. I love getting very immersed in my work, but I will say, not to try to be a drama queen about any of this, but this was really hard. Mostly daytime was okay, but at night, to be snoring all night and to have this dry mouth all night and to wake up after 9 hours and be groggy. And you think about how many people are doing this right now. And, they're taking 4 different drugs to get them through the day. But the core problem is their breathing.
Yeah. Mouse sleep affects everything.
Abs- Absolutely, and the science shows that too. Allergy season goes up. Who would have guessed snoring and sleep apnea go up? Because you can't breathe through your nose, and so you're forced to. When we open up our mouths, our tongues rock back in our throats. They obstruct our airways. It's simple physics.
So part of the experiment was taking some, not tissue, but scraping the mucus from the nasal cavity. I think it was before and after the experiment. So talk about what you guys found doing that.
You're making me relive this the most terrible part of this. I hope Nyack isn't listening. He was a complete gent. He did as good as he could possibly do. So he wanted to grab some RNA samples from deep inside our sinus passages. And so how you do this, I wasn't aware of this. When we were talking about the experiment, he just sort of dropped this bomb when we were there in his chair in his lab. But you do this by taking this Q-tip, which doesn't have soft cotton on it. It has a wire brush. Okay. And you jam this thing very deep into your nose, about 2 to 3 inches, and you scrape the inside to the point at which it bleeds. And so the nerves up here in the nose, so they are so sensitive. They're used to sensing differences in pressure of air, right? Very subtle stuff. They are not used to feeling sharp metal scraping against them. So it was one of the most bizarre experiences because my brain wasn't sure where this pain was coming from. It didn't feel localized in any way. It was almost like it was out in front of me, if that makes any sort of sense. So what he found is I had a bug in my nose. I forget the Latin name of that bug, but through being obstructed, I was getting sinusitis. So more sinusitis leads to more sinusitis because the less you can get air in here, the more you're creating an environment for different stuff to grow, be that a fungus or virus or whatever. And that's exactly what happened with me. And it got to the point where it was almost like, kind of getting serious. He mentioned, he's like, but then we went to nasal breathing, and without anything else, just by breathing through my nose, it all went away. Um, so, another reason you should be breathing through your nose. You can help filter out all that crap. You want things in the body to constantly be moving, especially the air you're taking in and exhaling.
And I know it's not just the mucus and contents of the nasal cavity that can change by nasal breathing. The actual structure of the face in the nasal cavity can change as well. So, talk about just by breathing differently, how that can put different pressures on the cavity and actually change its physical form.
Sure, if You are a mouth breather when you're young. You are going to be affecting the development of your face, the skeleture of your face. Because what happens is your mouth is open all day, all night, and your face will actually grow into this pattern. And it's so common that researchers have a name for it. They call it adenoid face. When the adenoids get inflamed or the tonsils get inflamed and you're forced to breathe through your mouth. So you see this very long face. You see a retrognathic profile. This will also lead to more crooked teeth. So it affects how you look. And if you look around on the streets today, almost everyone, I won't say everyone, but so many people have this retrognathic profile. I'm a great example, right? And having teeth extracted and braces certainly doesn't help. So, this is what it can do, because of course your body is going to respond to whatever inputs are in the environment. And what's especially important is in infancy. So we know that kids who are breastfed versus those who are bottle fed will be less apt to have snoring and sleep apnea later on in life. I'd also heard from many dentists that they will have straighter teeth because they will have wider mouths, right? They will have a different profile. After 2 years of breastfeeding, it will help to pull the face out and widen the airway.